Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
All right. Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. My guest today is Bernard Zapor. Is it Zapor?
However you want to say it. Nobody really knows. Zapor, Zapor, it all works.
All right. Bernard Zapor, a violent crime subject matter expert, national media commentator, and president and CEO of 3 Delta Consulting, a 25-year ATF veteran and faculty associate at ASU. Bernard brings frontline experience from counterterrorism, undercover operations, and executive threat mitigation. Welcome to the show, Bernard.
Thank you, Dr. Tim.
All right, thank you. I couldn't fit it all in. You have a lot of experience and some very interesting background. And before I forget, I want to mention it. I mean, Eastleuth.ai. We're going to talk about that later as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you give us a quick snapshot of your major focus or the things you're focusing on right now, because it's more than one.
So, I retired from my law enforcement career about 10 years ago. Okay. And
thank you for your service.
I've tried to align myself in things that are of service and make an impact. I've been in both corporate security roles as well as my own enterprise where I serve. I do expert witness testimony, but also training. We've done a lot of training on active shooters, survivability, workplace violence. Do a number of those for free for schools and places of worship, because it's a very simple message and it's attempting to get people to have a pathway on how to respond.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, as you know, the normal physiological response to hostile gunfire is to freeze solid. It's so overwhelming that we don't have an initial direction.
And it can be very costly to not have it.
Yeah. Unless somebody is raised in an environment where they've had acts of violence around them, you can see that when that happens too, because they immediately flee or react. Also, our military spends a large part of their training doctrine of trying to get that out of people and have them reactive in the appropriate way.
Right.
We also do investigations and a number of other things. But in the course of my various endeavors with that, I'm working with a consortium of former colleagues and then Silicon Valley technology people and some leadership from Washington, D.C. to develop Eastleuth.ai, which is going to be incredible. We can talk about that in a little bit, but I feel like this is really using my experiences and our collective experiences to do something good and to really have our last shot at providing value and service as we all age out in reality.
Okay. So how involved is that sort of education when you go around into places of worship or schools?
So what we try to do on that one with the 3 Delta part is, there's a lot of, you hear of active shooter training where they employ their local police department, they come out on a Saturday and they have role playing, all this. I don't do that. We're doing a very simple seminar. Originally it was designed for leadership on how to deal with workplace violence, because in OSHA Part 1, for example, you're required to provide a safe workplace. And so in retrospect of some of these workplace violence situations, particularly shootings, you've had companies and corporations find themselves in liability because they never had anything beyond even a fire evacuation plan and simple things like that. So we can come in and provide this thing. It's very simple. I try to do it less than 2 hours. So, you have to account for people's time. I did it for one super large U.S. corporation that allowed us to have 4 minutes. So how we did that was an executive leader in their security component, who was a former colleague of mine. Basically, they involved a Hollywood director to make a training film that was dramatic and effective to convey the same message, because they literally had, tens of thousands of associates at all these retail stores, but they wanted to be able to give them this training. The training is really just a take on something that has been made public for quite some time. That's run, hide, fight. Because You have to take what's available to you. And it's very hard to determine that. But this is really looking in retrospect at the causes of active shooter being one of them, but workplace violence. There's so much data and metrics out there. It's incredibly interesting. I mean, for example, it's fascinating to know that the most assaulted employee in the United States of all vocations, including cops and bouncers, is female bedside medical staff, particularly
Okay.
RNs. They're followed closely by behavioral tech folks as well, because you have people that, whether it's purposefully or a reaction to emotional compromise or drug substance compromise, it's an extremely violent place. I mean, hospitals are
Right.
violent.
Right.
And
My niece is a nurse who's been attacked. So
yeah, I
I
mean, it's
totally
a hell
get
of a
that.
thing when you think about it. We've done training for healthcare where it's, you're doing things very specific for the bedside and not putting themselves in a compromised position with the assumption that the patient may be combative coming out of a drug therapy or a
Hmm.
sedation, whatever.
Yep.
Or there's no
My wife
emotional
has been hit by people
Yeah,
waking up from sedation. Yes.
yeah, very much so. But in terms of like the general workplace violence, the number one cause of workplace violence is domestic violence. It's the stuff in our personal life that comes to the workplace. That could be, an ongoing dispute with a neighbor or some weird stalking thing, or you have a degrading marriage or relationship falling apart, or
Okay.
some guy sees and hears about his wife having lunch with Tim,
Hmm.
and starts to, in his mind, concoct that she's having an affair, a relationship. When in fact, Tim is married to Bob, and Tim and his wife are very good friends, and they are able to provide venting for each other about what's going on at work. But this guy's not hearing it, and so
Right.
he shows up at the workplace, that kind of stuff. And so the second one is the disgruntled employee. And when you look at case studies,
Hmm.
statistically, it's not somebody who's terminated on a Friday that freaks out and then causes damage, but
Right.
it's about 6 months later and other things that are falling apart in their life, they start to attribute those things to this employer or say their specific supervisor. And like all things that are wrapped in the devil's favorite costume, my quote, which is ego, they come back 6 months later for justice. And
Right.
it usually involves trying to kill who they think are responsible for their degenerating life and the things that are
Right.
happening.
And that I have another example for that one.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Steve, he's a security guard. He got shot 6 times, I think, at his new job as security guard by the old security guard who got fired months ago.
Oh my gosh. I hope he's okay. Did he make it?
Yeah, yeah, he did. This was almost 15 years ago now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So we tell employers all the time that they should have some mechanism for monitoring social media, because also it's not uncommon that there's
Mm,
breadcrumbs that go back,
right,
social media presence of somebody who's venting or they're communicating with, former employees or colleagues, and they're having conversations, but the current employees are not bringing that to the attention of anybody. And, you have to take people for their word. When they're saying these things, they know in this environment that if you're threatening or saying things, that there's going to be a reaction. A lot of people will be dismissive of that, and they never bring
right,
it to their employees' attention. They're putting everybody and their coworkers in jeopardy, because they don't want to be embarrassed or they want to be considered some kind of rat or snitch or whatever.
right,
Or maybe they hate the company themselves and they just don't want to do anything for their benefit. But it's disturbing, and a lot of it is, I shouldn't say that. There are some things that are preventable in some of the situation with information.
okay,
And then, like, thirdly, it's this active shooter thing. And that could be for all causations, a number of things. One thing we know about it is a person that shows up to do this type of mass killing, whoever they're going there to kill, they lack conscience and empathy. They're functioning, they look like a human being, but they're functioning more like a machine. So we're
right.
telling people,
They're
you do not beg
dissociated.
for your life because you're talking to a lawnmower. You have
Right,
to think in terms of the Terminator of all damn things, that this is it looks like a human being, and they're not going to be a scary monster like me. They're going to be somebody that, might look normal or nice or whatever. Our normal response to that is, "Oh, please, I have children." They're not hearing you. And
right,
so we're telling them that Basically, if you have the opportunity, you take whatever opportunity you have. You flee if you can get away. If you can't get away and you can hide, then you hide. You silence your cell phone, you hide yourself, concealment. Or if like, you're in a room or a classroom, you barricade and keep the person from coming in. But if you can't get away and you're faced with this person, you have to fight for your life. You have to give yourself permission to do every unimaginable thing to stop this person. And there have been people, including women and kids in school, that have stopped somebody who's already killed a multitude of people because they acted with aggression and begging God to let them live instead of begging the shooter to let them live. And going on to a full combative role to stop this person.
Right.
And, it's horrible to see these reoccurrences and know that maybe some people survived if they were told this.
Right.
So it's been a function of just communicating that message out in a very simple way. It's not overly dramatic. You're just giving people information, but it's in there. As you know, we've provided the seed for a reaction. It gives the brain a pathway of instruction to
Right.
do something. And then, it's more detailed than that because, like, for example, when you look at people that have survived, they survived out of happen chance or they survived out of their own actions or God's good grace, whatever. But, there's been a number of instances where they didn't hear gunfire, but they started feeling sick. They started feeling like, whoa, like they got overwhelmed with like a stress and a fear and not knowing exactly what it was for the first few seconds. And then they recognized an adult human screaming. And, there's nothing more terrifying than adults screaming in fear or terror because that's unusual. We don't hear that. Okay. We hear when a coworker smashes their thumb moving the wrong thing, or if they drop their coffee or they get hurt. That's a scream of pain.
Right.
But a scream of fear from an adult, man or woman, will immediately, as you know, activate flight or fight response. The adrenaline immediately toxifies in our system because it's not released. And that's that letdown feeling like something's wrong. So we ask people to pay attention to that. Pay attention. It's okay to come full awareness. If something feels weird, listen to your voice and investigate without running into danger. Usually that's preceded and then pretty quickly they're hearing screaming and then they might actually recognize gunfire, for example. The odd thing about the sonic physics, if you will, of what's happening in gunfire is it can be very different and misleading, especially like, say, in a warehouse or a big office building. If it gets anywhere near us, it is so, again, physiologically overwhelming. At that point, it's not that it's too late, but like you're in like immediacy beyond anything. But if they hear this off in the distance, they have to give themselves permission to survive, which means leaving and not worrying about what their coworkers think or their boss thinks and telling people to go with them. Like, I think we should go. And people are sitting there frozen. They won't leave. You leave them there. We've taught again back to the healthcare. If you have RN staff and they're worried about leaving the patient, well, do you want two RNs murdered and the patient, or two employees get to live and the patient maybe they get killed, maybe they don't, but you you have you have to survive and you have to try to take people with you. But if they will not, you've got to leave them. As cold as that is, some people will freeze in fear and would rather nothing to do anything because they're scared of doing anything and they have paralysis from it. If you can't
Right.
take them, you got to go. And it's been a campaign to make this commonplace. And a lot of times, obviously, you have to deal with the politics of a corporation or a company or a school or a church where they don't want to scare people with this training by giving the inference that somehow it's going to happen here. But the reality is, there hasn't been a place that has been immune to this. And there's not, one place that means it's going to happen more here than it's going to happen here. If you were to go back the day before one of these mass casualty events, we call them mass casualty events now more so than active shooter, but if you were there the day before and you said, look, if I told you that tomorrow a guy's going to walk in here and 7 of your colleagues are going to be murdered right here in this building, they would probably think you're crazy. Like, well, that stuff doesn't happen here, but it happens everywhere. Because when it comes to this active shooter part of workplace violence or any violence, uh, it's beyond the human realm in terms of, one thing I have found, which is interesting in doing national media on these things, is there's a demand for context. We want to know
Right.
that it's like, imagine where you live. If there was a murder two doors down, you are going to have relief when you find out that the teenager in the house was involved in drug dealing. And
Right.
this is a drug debt or a gang thing because it puts context to it.
Yep.
If somebody was murdered two doors down and the police aren't telling you the who and why or whatever, you're going to be not happy, disturbed. We all are. Even if it's for a horrific reason, well, all murders are for horrific outside of defense. But context is a real human desire because it
Right.
helps us process how something like that could happen. But this is my contention. I'm not a psychologist. I am not a research academic terminal degree holding person. I am somebody that has been in the human evil business for over 30 years. And I say I can say this and feel codified on how I'm saying it, that if you took away the context, the purported context of all these people that do this type of stuff, they're really the same person. Whether they're an Islamic terrorist, somebody who's anti-black, anti-Hispanic, anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-Trump, whatever it is, they're really the same person. And that would be the obsession of self. And it's we're in a very dangerous time in history in that we are disenfranchised. And this has
Right.
happened from two angles. Again, in my opinion. One is we've litigated God out of society. Can't have God at school, can't have God in the workplace, can't have God in government. Whatever God is, a higher power, some omnibenevolent, omnipotent, omnipresence entity that is greater than our purpose. It gives us purpose here. We have something other than eating, breathing, and pursuing our wants and desires. We have a higher calling for something. So we've sued God away from all that stuff. And then our families have fallen apart. The family in the United States has deteriorated. We have high divorce rates. We have a lot of single family, single parent families. And then to add the layer to that, perpetuated, I would say accelerated by the COVID stuff, is you have kids that don't have a lot of interaction with each other. They don't have a lot of social interaction with each other. Unless they're playing team sports or engaged in other activities, half their school might be online. They're at home. And their social world becomes this self-encapsulated thing, and they take that into adulthood. And you have young people that are, again, they're in this world where they don't communicate. They don't interface with each other directly. They're not out at, say, a bar or, going to parties and doing all these things. And so you take that person into what I would consider a very delicate age. When somebody sort of bumps into that late 30s, start hitting early 40s, one makes this evaluation of what they've done in this life. And
And they haven't been socialized.
they haven't been socialized on top of the fact that they're thinking, I really haven't done a damn thing in this life. I haven't done anything. And then to add insult to injury, they're just saturated with this falseness of everybody having this amazing life. They're eating amazing food. They're going on amazing trips. They're having all this wealth and success. Of course, never answer, how did you do it?
Right.
They somehow are
Right.
doing that without ever going to a job. And again, it comes down to this self-absorption. And then what do you have left? You have notoriety. Notoriety is something that, I'd rather go out with a bang, or, the more common thing is, and we would see this. This goes back before social media, before the internet, okay? And here in Phoenix, as an example, let's say prior to 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing, you had militias forming all over the country. And this was a very specific demographic, but they had concocted that the US national government was their enemy. And so were Jewish people. And so were minorities. They are a threat. It went from the survivalist mode to this ideologed thing that started to marry up a little bit with the racist aspect because you got to attribute your failings to some other group or person.
Right.
But the militia thing, what people don't realize is if you're this, and I'm just going to say it, not to be rude to anybody, but like you're this 40-year-old guy, you're living in your parents' basement, you're waiting for them to die so you can have the house without them in it. And you make an assessment of your life, and let's say like your really only employment was, you know, an attempt to be a donut baker where you're getting up at 1 o'clock in the morning, but you got fired from that because you weren't reliable or weren't good at it, and you haven't done much. But you met somebody that's into guns and you go to the gun show and you start looking at the guns and you get this whole, I think men have a predilection for collection and items, physical items. You start getting this predilection for firearms in the sense that now you're out shooting, it gives you like this sense of power and control. But what would be even better is if I had an enemy and that kind of marries up with the survivalist thing and sort of the American Nazi thing, even though that's to a very small degree. And I can speak to that because I did undercover in those groups. They're the ultimate disenfranchised. But now you have an enemy, a hobby, a mission, and self-worth all wrapped into one. And so you look at the militia groups back then, it was all very common, all that stuff. The lack of family, self, value, higher power, all that was absent for whatever happened to them. The Oklahoma City bombing was really the causation was not dissimilar on the reason why that happened. Some of that slowed the militia movement because now they knew that nobody's going to tolerate this group of weirdo dudes running around with their camouflage and their trucks, and they're out shooting and converting machine guns and making explosive devices because they're all going to be viewed as the same group that murdered over 30 children in a daycare in Oklahoma City Federal Building and 100 plus adults murdered that just were going to work that day. They weren't the New World Order. They were accountants and auditors and secretaries and people trying to make a living. But I guess that human predilection that can happen again in the absence of something greater than us, and the greater than us too includes like a family. You know how it is as a parent. You would do anything for your children. You're dedicated to your family and their well-being. Men are built to suffer. You're there for that. If you don't have any of that and you have yourself, it's dangerous. And now we're doing it, I would say, I've said this before, at the varsity level, because again, social media answers questions we never asked, and it's painting a false portrait of what our lives are supposed to be. And then you are aggregating how unfair it is on all that stuff. So it's a dangerous time. And again, back to the fact that in these mass casualty events, nobody wants to be the bad guy. So, I look at you can look at a ton of them. I mean, the guy who shot up a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, makes this decision that our country's at risk because of Mexican immigrants. I mean, that's somebody who's never cracked a history book in their life or hadn't lived in a community where the people they're people of faith that work harder than most. I mean, that conclusion comes from nonsense. It's like a last minute decision to give his enemy a face and start
Right.
making his desire to be notorious and to kill people based on something stupid as that. And that's what it is. And of course, the metaphysical or spiritual, if we're absent of something greater than us, then really what are we? I mean, we're given choice. As far as I know, we're the only organism on the planet that has choice. Everything else is programmed with hierarchy and instinct. We are given full-on choice, which means there's no bottom to human evil and there's no ceiling to human goodness. So,
Right. And you early on, you mentioned kind of the individualistic nature of Western civilization, right? I saw something once where they said if you ask somebody to describe what yourself, people, for example, in the U.S. would say, "Oh, I'm an accountant. I'm a fisherman or something like that." But when you ask people like in Eastern cultures, whatever, they say, "Oh, well, I'm a father," or they're in relation to other people, right? They're more social and oriented
Right.
instead of individualistic oriented.
Yeah.
Yep. And that sense of community. I think I've seen some numbers saying that religion's actually gone up in the past 5 years, at least among young families, which is
Like, one can only hope. Maybe it gets to the point where, and historically, at least on what we've measured from our existence on this planet, it's been a pendulum, right? And of course, God's been hijacked by nation states to control the masses.
sure.
Every atrocity we've done to each other has often been in the name of God. But,
Mhm.
a faith, whatever that is, and a family, at least those are good ingredients for
Right.
something more than this selfish, I'm going to go kill a bunch of people. Like
For,
the Las Vegas shooter who never pontificated anything political or racial. He just worked diligently to get the biggest body count he could. Never
oof.
told a soul. He just went at it. This guy had a full-on bloodlust to kill as many people as he could. It's
Right.
disturbing, terrifying, but again, we have choice.
So 3 Delta does a lot of education and defense or training for people, corporations, schools, entities. Is that the bulk of what 3 Delta focuses on?
We also do investigations. I've had some interesting investigations, for example, where a board of directors is there's something going on with their C-suite, for example, and HR is taking too long. And so we've had engagements that are basically undercover in the
Hmm.
company to get the vibe for what's really happening. Um, and then of course, I personally do expert witness testimony or consultation on litigation and things like that. So all those things where somebody with my background, I'm not the only one, there's bazillions of us, we engage in those kind of things. So, but Eastleuth AI, which is not part of 3
Yeah.
Delta, I work for them, is something that I have so much enthusiasm for as it's just starting to take off. And again, it's going to have an impact on our nation. It will have an impact on other developed countries. It's the timing of it is spectacular. We've removed the risk from it because it's not generative AI. We built the brain for this, so
Okay.
it doesn't create harm or cause us to go down the wrong path. It doesn't generate
Okay.
evidence. It's just amplifying human, I would say, like the best acumen of seasoned detectives, investigators, and removing the normal human feelings like assumption and forgetfulness or anything like that. It just
Yeah,
erases.
those biases, and it's focusing.
Yes.
Um, well, there's no governance issue, I guess. Then, if it's is or less of a governance issue if it's not
It's
changing
doing
on
the
its own.
same thing that an investigator would do, but it's doing it at the speed of light, essentially, and without inference or the normal human built-in biases or for example, homicide investigation is sort of generally considered the pinnacle of law enforcement investigations. And it's like that for a very specific reason. Number one, the cases are, immeasurably important because, one homicide has horrific ripple effects through companies and families and communities, and it
Sure.
doesn't end. The healing really only starts when there is a who, what, why, how, and when. Like who did it, why, all those kind of things.
The context search again.
Context. That one we have to have. We have to have it. And homicide is so egregious that that's not something you can have in a developed world where it goes unsolved. And so people have a very high investigative skill or they build it, but they also have some other stuff in their recipe which makes them unique. And that is they've got to have great intellect with instinct, but without personal bias. And that's a very difficult thing. So, for example, bias and ego, I'm wrapping those in one package. A homicide investigator, she or him, they allow the evidence to speak. They don't try to formulate a theory on their own. The theory is from the evidence that's speaking as it comes in. So obviously they start to build a structure based on the initial stuff, but stuff's going to come in that would exonerate somebody, for example, or make this thing not possible. So they allow that theory to collapse. If you had somebody in that role that just wants their theory of it to make sense, they're going to exclude all the things that don't support the theory. You couldn't have that.
Right.
So people in that role, they have low ego, high acuity, high intelligence, and then diligence and work ethic. And so we've amplified that
Okay. With
and
Eastleuth.
used the AI as if I'm walking into a police department, for example, a city police department, could be of any size, and I'm saying, here's 1,000 seasoned investigators that operate at the very highest level and 1,000 criminal analysts. None of them ever take leave or get sick or have a
Right.
bad day or they're going through a divorce and they speak instantaneously and telepathically to each other. I mean, the force multiplication here is huge, and it's coming at a really important time because most police agencies are in a big deficit for officers. And so you've lost the first thing that got cut was you had proactive like street units, right? They're not quite investigations, they're not patrol, but they would go out looking and they would saturate an area that was, so you had a lot of shootings in a neighborhood, in an area. They're out there in unmarked cars in teams of 2 or 4, and they're working people, they're working informants, they're trying to get to who's responsible for what. And
Right.
they're trying to be proactive and preventive to stop the violence. Well, those went away right away because you have to fulfill your public safety mandate, and that's the 24-hour coverage of the ability to respond to needs from the public. And those things have gone down. They've gone down because you've had mass retirements. And why wouldn't you, in the face of what's happened in the previous era, where law enforcement was now responsible for every interaction, even though you have people that are fighting and resisting arrests because, I've arrested hundreds and hundreds of people. I've never arrested a guilty person, not a single one, for the simple fact that a law enforcement officer doesn't determine guilt and innocence. We, the people, do. A jury of our peers, or a judge if you opt for that. And the jury, by the way, is a lady who's mumbling to herself underneath the bench at the bus stop. I mean, that's how it is in this country. We have to surrender ourselves to the ideal of we the people. You never want to ever let that be at risk. But the point being that somebody's getting arrested or they're having interaction with law enforcement, tell it to the judge. The judge is there to be the neutral. And that's not the case. We have this reactionary thing, and it's been perpetuated by the belief that law enforcement is immoral, bad, racist, all that stuff, statistically not supported in the least. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning twice in one day than you do being hurt or killed by a law enforcement officer. But you look at certain demographics, and you have like a very high probability of being assaulted by a contemporary. And so, it's like, it's this, ignoring data and facts and going with this urban legend nonsense. And so it's a horrible time for law enforcement in the last, say, 5 years, 10 years even. Bad time for them. And then this move to defund the police, which included taking the indemnification away from them. You can't have
Right.
people out there interfacing because generally, just like firefighters, they don't deal with a lot of fires. They deal with a lot of other issues because fire and
Right.
police are generally like the last rung in the deteriorating ladder. And it's like the thing you got to grasp onto for dear life. And so the normal thing, if they're not there to arrest people, it's like not the job of of a law enforcement officer isn't to arrest people. It's to solve an issue, either solve a crime or resolve something. Arrest may be one of those things, and that's just the beginning of it. The rest is you're taking them to a judge. And so, anyway, needless to say, I mean, I've been teaching at Arizona State University for over 10 years, and I can tell you been a huge change in the interest of students about what they wanted to do. I mean, 10, 12 years ago, students wanted to go into the FBI. They wanted to be a Phoenix police officer. They wanted to be LAPD. They wanted to be a state trooper, whatever. That evaporated. It evaporated in this era. And then also, it's the typical thing where television is the thing that makes us unusually stupid, right? Because people were convinced that they could be in law enforcement but not get dirty or get hurt, and they could be wearing tight clothes and be around beautiful people in a well-lit room with an air conditioner, and everybody wants to hear their theory on solving some issue. Complete nonsense. And I've told students that there is no law enforcement difference between being the federal government or the state or the city. You have a good chance of encountering violence personally. It's a violent job. And you're going to be exposed to things that people in society normally don't see. It's like, in a way, I kind of laugh. If you look at people who are culinary skilled artists, right? They make this spectacular food and it looks amazing and it tastes amazing. And we go and we pay a lot of money to go experience this. But in the same process of that, somebody has put an air gun to a cow's skull and ripped its guts out. And somebody is cleaning the filters and the drains in the sewer system. That's all the same system. All of it's the same thing. It just depends on where you want to be in that chain. Law enforcement, it's all the same job. There, you don't have the culinary person dealing with the good part. You're the animal slaughterer and the sewer cleaner and the chef, all of it. And being in trying to isolate oneself in a specific type of law enforcement doesn't exempt you from all that exposure. And that's just the reality of it. And so I'm also seeing some change back towards law enforcement. And you can see law enforcement agencies getting some budgets restored and starting to try to hire officers and agents. And we'll probably have some restoration of our public safety. This is interesting. There's a lot of touting of violent crime going down and shootings going down. But there's a big component of that that's jiggling the numbers and not reporting. There's cities that don't even report their crime statistics to the FBI for the annual report because they don't want to get the political criticism. It's like the absence of the truth.
Right. That's not going to go anywhere good. Okay. Interesting. Bernard, it's all of that has a big impact. The Eastleuth stuff sounds interesting, and the 3 Delta sounds very impactful. Saving lives. If people would like to connect with you or learn more about any of those things, where can they go? What should they do?
They can go to my site, 3delta.com, 3deltaconsulting.com, forgive me. And they can message me on there directly, or they can go to Eastleuth.ai, Eastleuth.ai.
Okay.
Eastleuth, as I say, it's ironically there is a route here in Arizona that will become nationally known with this. We have to keep it under wraps for a moment while this is going on, and there's plans to release it. But I think people in Arizona will be very proud of their law enforcement agencies here and what they're doing, again, to reduce victimization, to have crime solved, and actually it'll provide prevention as well, because you'll just get cases cleared up and freeing up law enforcement to do these other things. And if we talked about it a year from now, it's just going to be utterly amazing.
All right. Maybe we'll have you back on in a year and
Yeah.
talk some more about it.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Thank you very much, Bernard Zapor, for joining me today and sharing your insights into the industry.
Thank you, Doc.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.